Let's head into this newscast with all the latest coming in from United States. With over 3 million coronavirus cases in the US, schools across the country are stumbling to safely reopen. President Donald Trump, on the other hand, is pressurizing governors to open schools, insisting that students must return to the classroom for in-person learning. The US president has threatened to cut off funding to schools that do not open in the fall, with a warning that their funding may be cut off. This was sent out in a tweet by the US president. And this is what he had to say. If US schools do not reopen by November, he would cut off funding. Taking aim at the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Trump also criticized the CDC's recommendations for reopening schools as too expensive and impractical, following President Donald Trump in saying students must return to the classroom for in-person learning. Top federal health and education officials are now working on new guidance for reopening of schools in the fall.
We're prepared to work with each school, each jurisdiction, to help them use the different strategies that we've proposed that help do this safely, so they come up with the optimal strategy for those schools. I think it's critical, and it would be personally very disappointing to me, and I know my agency, if we saw that individuals were using these guidelines as a rationale for not reopening our schools.
Donald Trump has also accused Democrats of wanting to keep schools shut for political reasons. Meanwhile, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has blasted President Donald Trump for pressurizing state officials to reopen schools this fall, saying the federal government doesn't have any authority over the matter because schools reopening is a state decision. States are chiefly responsible for primary and secondary education, but the federal government provides some supplementary funding. And now for more details, let's quickly go across to our correspondent, Danielle Robertson, who's joining me live from Los Angeles at this hour. Danielle, a very good morning to you. Let me begin by asking, can the decision to reopen schools in the middle of a pandemic be taken solely by the US president alone? Don't local and state school leaders and public health officials have a role to play?
Yeah, so there is this controversy now on reopening schools amid this coronavirus pandemic. And of course, we have heard that Harvard and Massachusetts Institute of Technology are now suing President Trump, trying to prevent foreign students from being stripped of their visas. Now, this announcement about the visas being stripped from foreign students does throw more than 1 million international students on US visas into uncertainty. And the school year is set to begin in just weeks. The pandemic, of course, has thrown the education sector into the online world, and that shift now may mean that many international students might be kicked out of the country. This, of course, comes as university leaders have come out and schools have come out and said that the policy is reckless as well as cruel, and they are saying that this is a political stunt. There is a thought process that the White House is pushing for schools to reopen, and that this, reversal of foreign students to have their visas is another push, another pressure for schools to go ahead with reopening. Now, this, of course, comes as coronavirus cases are soaring in the United States, more than 3 million cases in the country. And today, in fact, we set a new daily record.
Right.
60,000 cases were recorded in just one day.
Right. Danielle, I'm going to speak about the new record as well. But, for now, focusing on the schools at a time when US public schools are already facing a financial crisis with states slashing education budgets, what does one make of the president threatening to slash federal funding? Also, does the power of the purse not rest with Congress?
Yes, sorry, it was a little bit hard to hear the question, but I think you were asking about slashing of school funding, which
yes,
the
that's
President
exactly
Trump,
what I'm asking.
has said that he might slash. Yeah, so President Trump, as you mentioned, has threatened to take away school funding if they do not push ahead with reopening plans. Of course, most of the schools are funded by the state, but the federal government does provide some additional cost as well to help them run. There are some states in particular that are staying in line with President Trump's wishes. That is Florida. Florida has decided that they are going to reopen next month. Of course, that is they've adhered to the pressure from President Trump. Of course, they want to kickstart their economy, and the reasoning for this is that President Trump says that if people go back to school, it will begin that resurgence of the economy that has been absolutely shattered by COVID-19. Many teachers, though, have come out and said that they fear going back to work. So many of the teachers in Florida in particular say they now have to choose between their jobs and getting revenue or risking their lives in the work environment. There is this tricky situation now where people are sort of left in limbo. They're not sure exactly what the guidelines are going to come up with when they are reviewed next week of how you can safely reopen schools. Of course, the education sector has been shattered by coronavirus. It is completely shifted online, and it is a massive part of the economy here in the United States, the education sector. We have some of the biggest universities and colleges in the world. So that is one of the reasonings why President Trump is pressuring them to reopen, but of course it comes at a very large safety and health risk.
Right, and what's extremely disturbing is that the health officials and state leaders are not being taken into account, and their guidance is also not being considered. That's extremely disturbing to know. But, hours after Donald Trump's threat to withhold funding to states that don't reopen, Pence has assured reporters that the White House would be very respectful of state and local communities who can't fully reopen schools because of certain limitations. Considering these clarifications coming in from the White House administration, what do you make of the difference in the White House messaging on the issue of coronavirus and schools particularly reopening?
Yeah, so what we're hearing from the White House, of course, the CDC has come up with guidelines in particular on how schools can be reopened safely. Those guidelines included things like having extra stationery, having extra buses so students can stagger their trip to schools, having everybody wear a mask, having classes in a smaller capacity. And the White House and President Trump has come out and said these guidelines that you have released, they are too tough. We're not going to do them. And so now the CDC has replied and they said, OK, we are going to, in fact, review those guidelines next week. Now, whether or not that means they are going to weaken them or, what they're going to change in particular is very much unseen. It does leave the guidelines and teachers and universities in limbo at this stage. But, of course, there has been that controversy between President Trump wanting to reopen schools and Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert and health experts, saying that the situation in the United States is not getting any better. And schools, of course, is where people congregate in large areas and they're quite close to each other, and it does involve teachers as well as students. So there is a little bit of a clash there between the health authorities and President Trump.
Absolutely. We'll have to wait and watch how the guidelines pan out there. Danielle, to end with, we were talking about the numbers. The U.S. has topped the 3 million mark cases. And now, what are health authorities attributing this acceleration to despite the increase in widespread testing?
What they are attributing to the increase is they are saying that there is an increase in testing. So California in particular can now test 100,000 people every single day. So health officials are saying due to the fact that we can increase testing, that is a reason as to why there is an increase of cases. But of course, that isn't the only reason. Many states have started to reopen the economy, and health officials have always predicted that the reopening of the economy would lead to an increase in coronavirus cases. Now, here in California in particular, we were one of the first to shut down and one of the first to officially reopen. Once we did reopen, the California governor actually had to reverse reopening plans, saying, in fact, actually, no, movies now have to shut back down for a second time. So reopening restaurants and movie theatres and giving the green light for that did cause the increase in cases across the state. And of course, we had a long weekend. There are some states as well that have enforced a mandatory mask wearing order because health experts noticed that people in states that weren't wearing a mask, they were having a spike in cases. So now in California, but not everywhere, it is mandatory to wear a mask, but many other states have refused to put that order in place, meaning that many people can decide for themselves if they want to wear a mask in public or not. So this conflict of interest does show that there has been a spike across the United States, and there are a lot of mixed messages in terms of the guidelines and what should be done across every county and every state in the across the United States. But one thing is for sure, the cases are increasing and health officials are continuing to raise the alarm.
All right, the cases are increasing and the numbers certainly don't seem to be going down anytime soon. Let's leave it at that. Thank you so much, Danielle, for joining us on this broadcast. Stay safe, stay healthy.